So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word, and this translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, found in Leviticus 23rd chapter, and also explains in the 61st chapter of Yeshayahu the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. Reading then from Yeshayahu the prophet, we can then establish the enormity of the times we are living in. Not only this, but it shows us the importance of understanding then the first and the second sons in each objective of each of these, as then the events unfold before our very eyes. So then, as we understand a bit of a history, we understand that then Japan had obviously bombarded Pearl Harbor in 41, but then later on, the people who were involved in analyzing why then United States was not prepared for this bombardment, what was then the failure that led the nation in its most shameful event of the period. And there are a few problems regarding then obviously the radar that was then given the indication of airplanes coming towards, yet the information was interpreted in a wrong way. Second, they simply neglected facts. Based from this situation where President Franklin then was extremely clear when he was then talking with the authorities of the time, he gave a few minutes of a very important and straightforward objective in what was coming towards US as they were preparing themselves to fight against Japan. But truly, they recognized they had neglected facts. So then, what can we read as far as what we consider today as being so simple as the new system of trade via computer? So then let's make an analysis, because when talks they come around regarding then war and then strategies, the best way of transmit the information is by using an existing topic that is obviously widely known. And Pearl Harbor is obviously a topic that the nation of the United States is, at least, should say, was a few years back, where then they had placed a high value in the military, in the history of the United States, and quite often yet it is very important to the nation. But what were then the facts regarding the Japanese? Firstly, they considered the Japanese inferior. They considered the Japanese as being short and ignorant and inferior to Westerners. They used eyewear that was very thick, and they were not very smart. So let's try to understand what the United States had in mind regarding then the capability of the Japanese. The point is, we are dealing with a period of time where then for more than 1,000 years trade it was done in a certain way, and then we find ourselves during a time where then we must not neglect the facts of what's coming in the future. As it was then explained before, the nation was not prepared for the war. Yet there were a few aspects leading towards the combat. What was then? The embargo of oil. Franklin, obviously, he had a problem with the Japanese because they were obviously arming then areas of the Pacific where they shouldn't. Besides other problems of military, then he decided then to have an embargo upon Japan of oil. So they had oil for roughly a year and a half. Not only this, but then they were expanding themselves towards the Pacific, so then they could observe in a horizon that the Empire of Japan was very, in a gradual understanding, they were expanding themselves towards the Pacific. Now, as far as when we compare these with the new system of trade via computer, we understand a distant fact, as it was a distant fact when then Japan was expanding itself on the Pacific. So then, the American people back then, during the 40s, they were not interested in the Pacific. They had no idea where the Guadalcanal was at, where Peleliu was at, where Okinawa was at, where Iwo Jima was at, where Guam was at, where Midway was at, and so many other islands. Most of the people did not have a clue. But let me ask you this. Because of their ignorance, then can we say the facts were not visible? The facts were there, and the people were ignorant. But then the fact that the ignorancy was not towards the fact of lack of study. Is not being in tune of the times and the seasons based from a factor of Japan being under an embargo. So as we read then very briefly from the records of the Shilishim or the Apostles, we are having then these documents for our instruction so we can understand these distant factors. Now comes a point where then we have shortly couple of years, roughly 24 months, to get these systems linked up so then we can understand and prepare ourselves for the new e-trade system via computer. Now, for some people, it is extremely far away from their thoughts, as it was nearly far away, so far away, but so far away that Japan would never, under any condition, bombard Pearl Harbor. We already said these many times. There is a second Pearl Harbor coming regarding then the new system of trade. Now, as the nation was surprised of the bombardment of Pearl Harbor, so then the world is going to be very surprised, mostly the west of this world, regarding then the new trade of China. Because we are talking with an area that is extremely tiny in the viewpoint of the prideful grandiosity of governance of nations. As it was so tiny the situation regarding the capability of the Japanese. Later on, they found out the Japanese, they were ferocious fighters. But until then, there was a long time they had to go through in order to understand this factor. Now, the fact is this: China is linking up the world with its system. China has already this system uploaded and ready. There is not a sense of nearing as far as what are the plans of China regarding e-trade in the future. For some of the nations, understanding then the instructions and then what Yohanan left for us to read and understand, some people, when they begin to understand this factor, they have a sense of nearing the truth. But the fact is, China already knows what to do. They already have the new system 100% and ready to go. And the president of China already explained many times the importance of infrastructure. Now the nations can't no longer ignore facts. Then Rochefort, when he was involved with the code breaking during the time of prior of the invasion of Midway, he had then set out a trap. There was then some 10 plus maybe 5% of the information being decoded, and he had the objective AF that he was then involved with as he was listening to the shortwave CW stations. He knew there was something going on with objective AF, and as they were then obviously observing the airplanes going in many directions, they observed during this particular time they were nearing Midway when this AF code was then released. So he decided then to say the water condenser was then defective and was then sent out in CW in the open. So he got his answer. They were able to alert, and they were able then to fight when they were ready then for combat. Now we are having over and over and over again China leading and sending equipment in space and another equipment in space and then another equipment in space, and we have rockets going over there. What do you think it is? Do you think it's for television and watching the weather? Boy, you have to be very low understanding person if you think China is going to waste time watching for weather situations. The fact is they are launching objects in space for the purposes of trade. Now what does it take to get in ahead of the United States of this important factor? China already purchased 25% of 197 of India. I already said many times before, the Chinese system is coming, the Chinese system is coming, and it is coming. And sure enough, Alibaba came forward as the most prominent and most important e-trade system in the world. Now if you think then China is going to waste its time sending equipment in space for the purposes of television and weather, then it shows the lack of basic analysis of facts. So then China is leading the world. It already gave a couple of years then for then the Chinese system being implemented around the world, and it's taking place even prior of these couple of years. So you can imagine the importance of this topic. Now there is a second Pearl Harbor coming regarding then e-trade. And the nations are going to find themselves in a desperate situation when the new system is released. They have to scramble for whatsoever they can do, but then the problem is this. Governments are not concerned with the problems of the future. Most of them simply they don't care. Now, as far as these people, these governments being uncaring, is it going to eliminate the problem of infrastructure and chaos when the new system comes? The people are going to get the worst of it because they are going to purchase via online and they are not going to receive their products. And the worst yet, the governments are not going to get their taxes. That's where then the situation regarding the bombardment then comes to play. It is extremely dangerous ignoring this factor, because it does not have only the US monetary system for the world to use. There are numerous other kinds of monetary systems, and some of them not linked with any central bank. Yeah, there is value if you purchase those kinds of systems. Now, how long is it going to take until the system is released and then chaos comes to play? So then what Yohanan then was explaining was, he saw these freighters, he saw these tradespeople engage themselves in straightforward in the leadership of the planet. So let's make sure we understand this factor and act as such. Please stay tuned, much more coming up.